She thought she could keep using my parking spot. Now she needs my permission just to pull in. You know that feeling when someone takes something that's rightfully yours, and you're left standing there wondering if you're crazy or if they really just did what you think they did? Well, let me tell you about Karen, and trust me, her name really was Karen, and how she turned my simple morning routine into a masterclass in property law and petty revenge. It all started 6 months ago when I moved into my new apartment complex in downtown Seattle. The building was one of those converted warehouses, all exposed brick and industrial chic, with about 40 units spread across 4 floors. What made this place special wasn't just the aesthetic, it was the parking situation. Unlike most downtown apartments where you're lucky to find street parking within 6 blocks, this building had its own private lot with designated spots for each unit. When I signed my lease, the property manager, a friendly woman named Susan, walked me through the building and pointed out parking space number 23. "This is yours," she said, handing me a little placard with my apartment number to hang from my rearview mirror. "Each tenant gets one designated spot. It's included in your rent, and it's yours for as long as you live here." Perfect, I thought. After years of circling blocks looking for parking, having my own guaranteed spot felt like winning the lottery. The space was perfectly positioned too, close to the building entrance but not so close that I'd hear every person walking by at all hours. It was wide enough for my Honda Civic with room to spare, and best of all, it was clearly marked with a bright yellow 23 painted on the concrete. For the first month, everything was smooth sailing. I'd leave for work at 7:30 a.m., come home around 6 p.m., and my spot would be waiting for me like a faithful friend. I even started to take a weird pride in how perfectly I could park between the lines. Life was good. Then Karen moved in. I first noticed her on a Tuesday morning when I was leaving for work. As I walked to my car, I saw a woman in her 50s with that particular haircut, you know the one, short in the back, longer in the front, with blonde highlights that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She was standing next to a gleaming white BMW SUV that was parked in space number 24, right next to mine. She gave me a curt nod as I got into my car, the kind of acknowledgement that somehow felt more like a territorial claim than a greeting. I didn't think much of it at the time. New neighbors, I figured. We'd probably warm up to each other eventually. I was wrong. The first incident happened the following Thursday. I came home from work to find Karen's BMW parked in my spot. Not overlapping the lines, not accidentally over the boundary, completely, intentionally parked in space 23. My space. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the situation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she'd gotten confused about which space was hers. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. I parked in a visitor spot and walked up to her apartment, 2B, according to the mailboxes, and knocked on the door. Karen answered wearing yoga pants and a tank top, looking annoyed that someone had dared to interrupt her evening. "Yes. Hi, I'm Jake from apartment 3A, I said, trying to keep my voice friendly. "I think there might be some confusion about the parking spaces. You're parked in my spot, number 23. I was wondering if you could move your car so I can park there." Karen looked at me like I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. "Excuse me?" "Your car," I repeated, starting to feel like maybe this wasn't going to go as smoothly as I'd hoped. "It's in parking space 23, which is assigned to my apartment. Could you move it to your assigned spot?" "I don't think so," she said, crossing her arms. "I've been parking there all week. If it was really your spot, wouldn't there be some kind of sign or something?" I blinked. "There is a sign. The number 23 is painted right on the ground. That old thing. That paint is so faded you can barely see it. Besides, possession is 9/10 of the law. I'm parked there now, so it's my spot." I felt my blood pressure start to rise. That's not how parking assignments work. Each apartment has a designated spot. Mine is 23, yours should be 24. Karen's expression shifted from annoyed to outright hostile. "Look, I don't know what kind. Of scam you're trying to pull here, but I'm not moving my car. If you have a problem with it, take it up with management. And with that, she shut the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate dimension where basic courtesy and property rights didn't exist. But no, I was still in the hallway of my apartment building, and Karen had just essentially stolen my parking spot and told me to deal with it. The next morning, I called the property management company first thing. Susan listened to my complaint with what sounded like weary familiarity. "Oh, you must be dealing with Karen from 2B, she said with a sigh. "She's been challenging. Can you help me resolve this? She's parked in my assigned spot and refuses to move. I'll send her a notice today reminding her of the parking assignments. Technically, she's in violation of her lease by parking in another tenant's space." That afternoon, I came home to find my spot empty. Victory, I thought. Maybe Karen had just needed an official reminder of the rules. I parked in my spot, feeling relieved that the whole thing had been resolved so easily. The relief lasted exactly one day. Friday evening, Karen's BMW was back in my spot. This time, there was a note under my windshield wiper when I parked in the visitor area: "This is my parking spot now. Find somewhere else." I called Susan again. This time, she sounded frustrated. I sent her a written notice, and she called me back saying that you were harassing her and that she'd been parking in that spot since she moved in. She claims there was some kind of verbal agreement. That's completely untrue. I have my lease agreement that clearly states space 23 is assigned to apartment 3A. I know, Jake. I'll send her a formal warning letter. If she continues to violate the parking policy, we can pursue lease termination, but that's a long process. Long process. Those words stuck with me as I trudged up to my apartment, already dreading the daily parking battle that my life had apparently become. Over the next 2 weeks, it became a game of musical parking spots. Some days I'd come home to find Karen in my space, other days it would be empty. There was no pattern to it, which somehow made it more infuriating. It felt like she was deliberately messing with me, keeping me on edge, never knowing whether I'd be able to park in my own assigned spot. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I'd had a particularly rough day at work, a client presentation had gone sideways, and I was looking forward to just getting home, ordering some takeout, and watching Netflix. Instead, I pulled into the parking lot to find not only was Karen parked in my spot, but she'd also left her car in such a way that it was taking up part of the neighboring visitor space, making it impossible for me to park there either. I sat in my car in the middle of the lot, rain drumming on the roof, and felt something snap inside me. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was about someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them, someone who was perfectly comfortable making another person's life difficult for no reason other than they could. That's when I had what you might call an inspiration. I pulled out my phone and started researching. Property records, zoning laws, ownership structures. I dove deep into the bureaucratic rabbit hole that governs urban real estate. What I discovered was fascinating. The apartment building sat on a large lot that had been subdivided when it was converted from a warehouse. The building itself was owned by a property management company, but the parking lot was actually owned by a separate entity, a small real estate investment firm that leased the parking rights to the building management company. More interesting still, I learned that this investment firm was struggling financially. A few discreet phone calls revealed that they were looking to sell off some of their smaller holdings to raise capital. The parking lot, as it turned out, was one of the properties they were considering selling. I spent the next week doing research that would make a private investigator proud. I learned about property values, zoning restrictions, and commercial real estate transactions. I talked to lawyers, real estate agents, and even an urban planning consultant. By the end of the week, I had a plan that was either brilliantly strategic or completely insane. I was going to buy the parking lot. Now, I should mention that I'm not wealthy. I work in IT for a mid-sized company, and while I do okay, I'm not exactly rolling in investment capital. But I'd been saving up for a house down payment, and I had some inheritance money from my grandmother that I'd been keeping in a savings account. Combined with a small business loan and a little creative financing, I could just barely make it work. The purchase process took 2 months of paperwork, inspections, and negotiations. During this time, Karen continued her parking spot campaign with renewed vigor. She seemed to sense that I was up to something, and her passive-aggressive behavior escalated accordingly. She started parking in my spot every single day, sometimes leaving notes about how I should learn to share, or how I was being selfish and entitled. The irony was almost too much to bear. Finally, on a crisp October morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. "Congratulations, Mr. Peterson," said my real estate attorney. "The property transfer is complete. You are now the proud owner of the Riverside Apartments parking facility." I owned the parking lot. All of it. The first thing I did was call Susan at the property management company. "Hi Susan, this is Jake Peterson from apartment 3A. I need to discuss some changes to the parking situation." "Oh no," she said, sounding tired. "What has Karen done now?" "Actually, this isn't about Karen specifically. It's about the parking lot in general. You see, I just bought it." There was a long pause. "You bought what?" "The parking lot. I'm now the owner of the property where all the tenants park their cars." Another pause, even longer this time. "I'm going to need some documentation." I spent the next hour on the phone with Susan and her supervisor, walking them through the legal paperwork that proved I was now their landlord, so to speak. The building management company had been leasing the parking rights for $8,000 a month. As the new owner, I was perfectly within my rights to continue that arrangement, modify it, or terminate it entirely. But I wasn't interested in screwing over all my neighbors. I was interested in solving one very specific problem. That afternoon, I had a contractor come out to the parking lot. We installed a gate system, nothing too fancy, just a simple motorized arm that could be controlled by a keypad or remote control. The gate was positioned so that it blocked access to the back portion of the parking lot, where spaces 20 through 30 were located. This included both my space and Karen's space. I sent a notice to all affected tenants explaining that as the new owner, I was implementing some security improvements to prevent unauthorized parking. Every tenant would receive a gate remote and a keypad code. The gate would be open during the day but closed from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. for security purposes. Everyone was fine with this arrangement. Everyone except Karen. She came storming up to my door the day after the gate was installed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded when I opened the door. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, though I was trying not to smile. "That gate. You can't just install a gate in the parking lot." "Actually, I can. I own the parking lot now. I can pretty much do whatever I want with it, as long as I honor the existing lease agreements." Karen's face went through several different shades of red. "You bought the parking lot just to mess with me?" "I bought the parking lot for a number of reasons. Security was a major concern. Too many unauthorized people have been parking in assigned spaces. This is harassment. This is illegal. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "I have all the legal documentation. Everything I've done is completely above board." She stormed off, muttering threats about lawyers and lawsuits. The next morning, I watched from my window as Karen approached the gate to leave for work. She had a remote control. I'd made sure all tenants got them, because I wasn't actually trying to make anyone's life difficult unnecessarily. The gate opened, she drove through, and it closed behind her. But when she came home that evening, something interesting happened. Karen pulled up to the gate and pressed her remote. The gate opened. She drove through, and then she tried to park in my spot, space 23. But here's the thing about owning property, you get to make the rules. I had installed a small but sturdy bollard. Essentially a metal post, right in the middle of parking space 23. It was removable, but only with a special key that I had. Attached to the bollard was a small sign, "Private space, authorized vehicles only." Karen sat in her BMW for a full 10 minutes, staring at the bollard. I watched from my apartment window as she got out of her car, walked over to the post, and tried to move it. When that didn't work, she pulled out her phone and made what I assumed was an angry call to someone. Finally, she parked in her actual assigned spot, number 24, and stormed into the building. 20 minutes later, she was knocking on my door again. "You have to move that post," she said, slightly out of breath. "I can't park in my spot." "Your spot is number 24, I replied. According to the lease agreements I reviewed when I purchased the property, apartment 2B is assigned to parking space 24. That space is completely accessible. But I've been parking in 23. Space 23 is assigned to apartment 3A. That's my apartment. Since I own the lot now, I've decided to put some additional security measures on my personal space." Karen's eyes narrowed. "How much?" "How much what?" "How much do you want to park in that spot?" "I'll pay you." This was unexpected. I thought about it for a moment. "That spot isn't for rent. It's reserved for my exclusive use. Everything has a price." "Name it." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had spent months making my life unnecessarily difficult, who had stolen my parking spot and then told me to deal with it, who had left passive-aggressive notes and refused to follow basic community rules. $1,000, I said. "What?" $1,000 per month, paid in advance, for a revocable license to park in space 23. The license can be terminated by me at any time with 24 hours notice. Karen's mouth fell open. "That's insane. That's more than most people pay for rent." "That's my price. The spot isn't really for rent anyway, I'm just throwing out a number since you asked. I prefer to keep it for my own use." "You can't do this. This is extortion. It's actually just property rights. I own the space, I get to decide who uses it and under what terms. You're welcome to park in your assigned spot, number 24, anytime you want. That access is guaranteed by your lease agreement." Karen stood there sputtering for a moment, then turned and stalked away. Over the next few days, Karen tried everything she could think of. She called the property management company, but they confirmed that I was indeed the legal owner of the parking lot and had every right to control access to the spaces. She called the police, but they explained that it was a civil property matter and there was no crime being committed. She even tried to get other tenants to complain about the gate, but since it didn't actually inconvenience anyone except her, and even then, only because she was trying to park in someone else's assigned space, nobody really cared. The bollard in space 23 became a daily reminder of the new reality. Every morning and evening, Karen had to drive past my parking space with its little metal post standing guard, a physical manifestation of the fact that actions have consequences. But the story doesn't end there. About a month after I installed the gate and bollard system, I was coming home from work when I noticed something different in the parking lot. Karen's BMW wasn't in space 24. Instead, there was a small, older sedan, a Toyota Corolla that had definitely seen better days. Curious, I parked in my spot, after removing the bollard, of course, and checked the directory in the building lobby. Karen was still listed as the tenant in 2B. The mystery was solved the next morning when I ran into my neighbor from 1C in the hallway. "Did you hear about Karen?" she asked. "What about her?" "She had to sell her BMW. Apparently, she was leasing it and couldn't afford the payments anymore. Something about her job situation changing." I felt a tiny pang of something that might have been sympathy. Losing a job is tough, and having to downgrade your car is never fun. But then I remembered the months of parking lot battles, the passive-aggressive notes, the complete disregard for basic community rules. "That's too bad," I said, and meant it, at least partially. As the weeks went by, I noticed that Karen's behavior had changed significantly. She parked in her assigned spot every single day, no exceptions. She didn't leave any more notes. She didn't try to argue about parking arrangements. When we passed each other in the hallway or the parking lot, she would give a curt nod, not friendly, but not hostile either. It was like she had finally accepted the reality of the situation. The bollard in Space 23 had become a symbol of something larger than just parking. It represented the idea that you can't just take what belongs to someone else and expect no consequences. It stood for the principle that being a good neighbor means respecting other people's rights and property. But more than that, it had taught me something important about myself. For months, I had felt powerless in the face of Karen's aggressive behavior. I had relied on property management and lease agreements and the basic assumption that people would do the right thing when asked politely. When all of that failed, I had felt like I was out of options. Buying the parking lot had been an extreme solution, no doubt about it. Most people wouldn't have the resources or the motivation to purchase real estate just to solve a parking dispute. But it had shown me that there's almost always a way to solve a problem if you're willing to think creatively and take some risks. The parking lot had turned out to be a decent investment, too. The rent I collected from the building management company more than covered my loan payments, and the property was steadily appreciating in value. I had accidentally become a small-scale real estate investor, all because I was tired of someone stealing my parking spot. 6 months later, I was checking my mail when I noticed that apartment 2B had a "for rent" sign in the window. Karen was moving out. Part of me felt bad about this. Had my parking lot purchase made her life so difficult that she felt she had to move? Or was she leaving for completely unrelated reasons, job change, financial difficulties, relationship issues? I would never know for sure. But I also felt a sense of vindication. For months, Karen had made my life unnecessarily complicated. She had taken something that didn't belong to her and refused to give it back. She had been dismissive, rude, and completely unwilling to find a reasonable compromise. In the end, the universe had a way of balancing things out. A week later, I was walking to my car when I saw a moving truck parked in front of the building. Karen was directing the movers, pointing at boxes and furniture with the same authoritative gestures she had used when telling me that my parking spot was now hers. As I walked past, she looked up and caught my eye. For a moment, I thought she might say something, an apology, maybe, or one final argument about parking rights. Instead, she just nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed acknowledgement of everything that had happened between us. I nodded back and continued walking to my car. As I drove out of the parking lot that morning, I caught a glimpse of the bollard in my rearview mirror, still standing guard over Space 23. It had become such a normal part of my routine that I barely noticed it anymore. But seeing it in that moment, I smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just refusing to be pushed around, standing up for what's rightfully yours, and being willing to take unconventional action when conventional approaches fail. Karen had taught me that lesson, though I doubt she intended to. She had pushed me to think outside the box, to research property law and real estate investment, to take risks and invest in myself. In trying to take something that wasn't hers, she had inadvertently helped me become more resourceful, more confident, and yes, wealthier. The new tenant who moved into 2B was a quiet graduate student named Maria. She parked in Space 24 every day without fail, never once encroaching on anyone else's assigned spot. She even said hello when we passed in the hallway. It was amazing how much more peaceful life could be when everyone just followed the basic rules of community living. The bollard is still there, by the way. I could remove it permanently now, there's no ongoing threat to my parking space, but I've decided to keep it. It serves as a reminder of an important lesson: sometimes you have to be willing to go to extraordinary lengths to protect what's yours. And who knows? Maybe someday I'll tell this story to my kids, about the time their dad bought a parking lot just to make a point about property rights and personal responsibility. They'll probably think I'm crazy. But they'll also know that their dad doesn't get pushed around. The parking spot is mine now, officially and legally and completely. The gate opens when I need it to, the bollard moves when I want to park, and every single day I'm reminded that sometimes the best solution to a problem is the one nobody expects. Karen thought she could keep using my parking spot. Now she's not even in the same zip code. And that, I think, is what we call justice.